It is currently a cool, crisp December 21st, Thursday evening, and I'm here today with the Super Q&A, where you guys can ask me any number of massive questions based on Guild Wars or real life or whatever. People are guaranteed their answers to their topics from Patreon, which you can find a link down in the description. I would usually have this on Wednesdays. We're doing it Thursday today, though, because yesterday I actually spent a little bit of extra time raiding, and finally... how long after the triple release came out, I have beaten the new wing at last, Wing 5, so Doom is defeated, and I'll have lots of cool content for you guys coming up on that. I'm really glad to have that weight off of my shoulders now, and yeah, there's a lot of fun things going on, but for today, I've got a ton of questions from you guys, many of them Christmassy related, and obviously Guild Wars 2 related, so let's just jump straight in and see what we think. We'll start off here with Umbra, who asks, in Vlast's fight against Balthazar, Vlast saves the commander in return for his death. So, obviously, big Path of Fire spoilers here. And the blast presumably knocks Balthazar away. Did Balthazar absorb his power/magic? Was it stored in the memory crystals or dispersed altogether? When absorbing the bloodstone, the blast reversed itself, not having the same effect. Does this mean that Vlast was less or more powerful, or did Vlast deliberately push Balthazar back? You've thought very deeply here. I didn't even consider that this was an aspect of the story to get into. I wonder then as well whether maybe the writers didn't think of this. Perhaps the Bloodstone explosion functioned differently because it had been packaged differently. It wasn't exactly a living creature that was being detonated, if you will, at that point. I think it was really just an excuse to get Balthazar out of the picture for that little bit of the story, right? It's a good question, though, and I suppose... if I was going to guess, I would say that Vlast was less powerful than a Bloodstone. Like, we don't really have hard and fast quantitative metrics on this, but the job that the Seers enacted, trying to hustle away so much magic from the Elder Dragons before and hide it in those Bloodstones, I sort of always thought of that as a hell of a lot of magic. Maybe that comes from my roots in Guild Wars 1, as sort of believing all the magic was coming from there, which really has sort of been retconned out now at this point. And Vlast is sort of a little bit of a newer character, really, right? Like, Vlast was just a baby dragon 250 years ago. Would he really have been able to gather that much? I know that they say that there's a lot more magic around Interior at the moment, as it's leaked out of the Elder Dragons as they slept and stuff. But, yeah, I'm not too sure. That's a very interesting question, though, and it's a whole line of reasoning I hadn't thought of. Let's move on. We got Thalander46, who says, I know I heard the random object story behind Wooden Potatoes before. So this is referring to how I named myself on YouTube, which is an extremely boring story about how I just put two random items together, essentially. I know I've heard that story before, but I was surprised to hear in a recent Q&A that you don't really like the name Wooden Potatoes. That was something I never really considered, since you've built such a strong identity brand behind it. If there were no consequences and you could keep all of the marketing, recognition, branding power, etc. that the WP name currently has, what would you name your YouTube channel today? It's really interesting that you think that it's this really solid, strong, recognizable thing, because I didn't really do much to encourage that. I have a channel icon, which I've always kept the same. I show that icon or the outline of it occasionally in the background of videos, and I have it on my intro. That's it, really. It's not like I've done that much, but yeah, I'm WP now, for better or worse, and it is pretty recognizable. It'd be very weird to think of me under a different name. Amazing question. What would I call myself if I had that choice to swap? I think that I would probably hone in very specifically on the kind of content that I want to do and have a name that is descriptive of that. So as we move into more alternate Let's Play territory as well, in the kind of the style that I do, as we diversify from just Guild Wars, or if we double, triple down on Guild Wars, the name would reflect that somehow. And then the other idea, I think, actually, is to draw on my real name. I've talked a little bit about the whole anonymity thing many times in the past, but I think that one thing, if you were starting YouTube today, it's probably best to just brand yourself as who you are in the real world, particularly if you have ambitions to sort of market yourself in other sectors of entertainment, which I really don't, but I think it just keeps doors open to you. So I think that that's sort of the direction I'd go in. It's funny as well, because I've got a lot of fun ideas for other channels that I would know their names very easily. And again, it just comes down to exactly what the concept behind that channel is. Like, I've got an idea for a Concrete Ducks style YouTube experience, and I have the perfect name for it. So perfect that I'm scared to even say it here in case it's stolen. But yeah, so there you go. It's an interesting question, and it would probably be something like what Matt did, Matt Visual. I think that he probably was more on the ball than I was, and that was many years ago. He named himself. So there you have it. I love the whole internet thing of people being able to name themselves, which is culturally something we really don't get much advantage of because our parents give us our names generally. Anyway, moving on. Christopher says, not sure if this has been asked in the developer AMAs, but I at least want the WP thoughts. Why is armor repair still a thing? They keep nerfing it down and down, making it so easy to do. Why not just remove it? Better yet, why not replace it with a better system? They should remove the waypoint cost to revive with the same zone and then add back the cost to repair. PS, thoughts on the raid and world versus world rule that you can't res in combat? Alright, so the little question you tacked on at the end there, I think that they've been really good, obviously. Extremely important and helped both game modes in a massive way, prevented cheesy experiences. I think that's one of the better changes, unanimously better changes I've seen the devs do in the game, and a very profound one. But going back to the main question, why is armor repair a thing? You know, you describe them as constantly nerfing it down and down, and when I first read your comment, I was a bit cynical, but if you really think about it, you're right. You know, first they did take the cost away, but if you've noticed, very frequently in updates they're adding more ways to refine and just remove and eliminate the mechanic. So like, I believe in Wing 5 when you interact with the ley rifts now, it automatically repairs your armor. And recently in Fractals, they've made it so when you hit one of the singularities to give yourself a free rebound, essentially, it automatically drinks your potion and automatically repairs your armor. Like, they're just trying to get rid of it. So the question is, yeah, why haven't they just deleted it full stop? Because they clearly have no interest in pursuing it as a mechanic, not in the open world and not in the organized structured PvE at the end. Why is it a thing? My only answer to this is perhaps it's a technical thing, or the original idea, I think, of the mechanic, or at least death penalty, was that it's something that teaches new players that dying is bad. And we can sort of argue over the worthwhileness of something like that, because obviously dying is a punishment in itself, and that's sort of also the hard line that they go with a lot of the time, which is why they don't have these further punishments like other MMOs will cause you to lose experience or spend more currency and so forth. But I think if it's there for an actual design reason, I think it's probably just because they like it as a signal to new players that, oh, this isn't good. But, I mean, the UI is so poorly represents it now. It does feel like a very arbitrary, weird thing. And I'm with you. I think that they should just delete it instead of sort of half-arsing it as they currently go. In Perfect World, I actually would prefer an MMO that actually looks at that mechanic and embraces a mechanic like that. But Guild Wars 2 is clearly not that MMO these days. Moving on, our next question comes from Umbra, again, who says, what's your favourite hidden area in the game, and what kind of non-boss enemy do you hate fighting? So we've got a double whammy, simple questions, simple answers. First thing that comes to my mind, which is always how I answer favourite questions, because to actually figure out my favourite takes way too much brain power because the game's too huge. But the one I always immediately think of is Timberline Falls, right near the exit of Timberline as you're going to Mount Maelstrom. If you head to the bottom left corner, the southwestern corner, there's like a hidden cave-like waterfall area that you can walk up. I believe it's called the Talu Chute, and the name of the region is perhaps a reference to an area from Guild Wars 1, where once upon a time lots of Tengu roamed around, and we used to farm trolls in a cave and so on. I really like that area. I don't know what it is about there. I think it eventually became the location of a guild trek. Not that guild treks are very important for Guild Wars 2 these days, but it's used for that and nothing else, and I think it's a fun little area. And the other thing, what kind of non-boss enemy do I hate fighting? We could really go down the rabbit hole here, especially now that Path of Fire's out, because they added all those mobs that have all those blinds and things. I know some people hate fighting Hydra, and they're non-boss enemies technically. For me, it's an old classic. I'm going to get many people listening right now to nod their heads. Dredge. I think Dredge, unblindable, really frustrating. Specifically Dredge disaggregators. The ones that have like the shockwave attacks and stuff. Ah! That room in Dredgehaunt Cliffs where you have to get the Vista really high up. I love that room and I hate that room because it's just so frustrating. I think the Dredge are really good enemies, but I also think that they're enemies I hate fighting. That's why they're good, because, you know, they've got a lot of aspects to them. But my god, do I dislike fighting them. Alright, next question is from Manny Moonstone, who says, hey WP, what are your thoughts on the newest raid rewards? Good question, since I just finished it. In Heart of Thorns, raids had a clear reward goal. That was legendary armor. Now that we're in the Path of Fire era, that's gone. So can the new rewards sustain the raiding population for months or years to come? I don't raid, but I care about the population because we get cool stories and new mechanics in PvE because of raid development. Thanks, dude. This is a really good question. Because I remember being surprised when Legendary Armor came out, finally, and many of us had our 150 insights or whatever, that I heard a lot of people saying, yeah, I don't raid anymore because there's no Legendary Armor to go for. And I don't know what the actual population metrics are and things, but it really does feel like the scene got a hit, or a lot of people were very vocal about no longer caring about it because they were only doing it for the armor. And it's always one of those things that really fascinates me, because my value that I get out of raiding is the thrill and the experience of the story, of actually overcoming challenges, of the new environments that I go to. I never personally needed Legendary Armor as a carrot on a stick to do it. But in MMOs, you get this culture, you get this thing where people just kind of don't like doing stuff unless there's a reward, unless there's some major new account progression for them to go for. The experience is not enough. Why am I doing this if I'm not getting a reward? And that reward has to be something really unique and special. And for all the hate that Legendary Armor got because it forced people into raiding, it definitely also captured a lot of people who never would have done it otherwise. So again, it's difficult for me to talk about because I don't know exact numbers. And I also don't identify with the people who are in that camp. And I doubt that many of them are even listening to this video at this point, because they're probably long gone if that's all they cared about was Legendary Armor. But we are now in a situation where there's not going to be any. Obviously, there will, as just general churn for the game, broadly speaking, occurs, there will be new people who, you know, a week from now join Guild Wars 2 and decide to go for their first set, and then someone else will go for their first set. But that's going to be more minimal than what we had when Heart of Thorns first came out, and we were all doing it for that Legendary Armor idea. They've obviously gone to gating crystals as a new kind of currency there, but LI is the same. Maybe this also, I would say, kind of stabilizes the audience we have. You can kind of say that people who are raiding right now are going to be around for a long time. If they're not doing it for Legendary Armor, like, there's no exhaustion point there. They're doing it because they love raiding, because the content is good enough. And maybe there's something good to be said for that stability now that, you know, it's not about the Legendary Armor for a lot of people. But is that too big of a hit to the scene? Either way, I think that as long as Guild Wars 2 is going, those raid teams hopefully will keep going. I don't really imagine us to be in a world where Legendary Armor's gone away and now not enough people playing it, so they're cancelling it all. If anything, the most recent comments we heard from AMAs were that they were going to try and increase the frequency of the wings coming out, and let's hope that they hold true to that. So I'm really not concerned from that side of things. The other thing to consider too is it's not just that they're not adding new Legendary Armor, but it's also that now you can also get it in PvP and World vs. World, which was sorely needed and people really wanted. But again, that means that now there's another subsection of people who once upon a time would have been in that format that won't do it because they're going to do it in one of the other areas too. So it's significantly diminished, but does that threaten the scene in general? I can't really say. And it's hard for me to talk about in the first place because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really in that category. It is a curious one though. Next, we have a question from Karitog, who's got quite a lot on this one. Their first is this, though. Hey, WP, while there's a general consensus that the faster releases are awesome, I would argue that Heart of Thorns was better when looking at the hype that was created. In my opinion, Path of Fire released far less info and created far less hype than Heart of Thorns. This was no doubt in part because of the leaks, but it also because of the quicker release, and because of this, it felt like a large living story part than the big expansion that it was. My question is, what was worth more, a nice amount of hype for expansions or a quick release? It's not a particularly new topic, and my opinions haven't really changed. Now, what you guys are going to hear my answer to here is extremely selfish, and it's not an answer that is representative of general players of Guild Wars 2 at all. But my opinion on this is I really like the way that HOT did it, because as a content creator, and this is purely selfish, as a content creator, it meant months and months of easy to conceive content that got high viewership. So as wood and potatoes, Heart of Thorns was awesome. POF, it was like, you know, it flashed up, we suddenly had a bomb of information that totally drowned me down, and I couldn't talk about it all quick enough, or if I did, it was just so many hours of things to speculate and talk about. No one would have the time to watch all of that in such a short window. And then the expansion was out suddenly, and, you know, this idea of word of mouth, was there really enough time for everyone to hear about POF and what was going on with the game? I think that this is not actually a situation where there's an easy answer, especially not for me with my weird, you know, content creation biases in there. But I remember very clearly And they might even be in the comments below, and feel free to say this in the comments below. I remember very clearly the Heart of Thorns style of things. People hating. General players loathing that they heard about the expansion and then had to wait, like, how many months was it? 9 months or something? That it took so long that they only got one elite specialization per week. I loved those elite specialization weeks and being able to speculate and talk about the elite specs and really pick into it and have a full 7 days to do it. But people really didn't like that. So POF in so many ways was listening to the community, I think, in so many ways. So this time they just gave us all the elite specializations at once. But look at what happened there. From my end, it was miserable. It was so difficult. I had no idea how the devs were going to release that information or what they were going to, what channels that was going to come through. And ended up, not giving people good enough stuff when it came to the elite specs. So, yeah, I don't know. I think there's a question of patience. I think there's a question of how enthusiastic you are. There's always these discussions that come out where people say, oh, there's such a thing as overhype, that if you announce the launch of something and it's too far away from the actual launch, people will no longer be interested. I don't know how much I believe in that, honestly, looking at the metrics of how things went with Heart of Thorns. But yeah, there's all of these different things to contend with, and it does feel like that shorter window makes Path of Fire look smaller than it actually was, when in truth I think it was so much huger. But yeah, so I don't really have an answer to this question. I just have the ability to express my perspective, which is not one most players will have, just because I've got these sort of, I've got the wood and potatoes side of stuff to think about too. So hopefully you find that interesting, if not, a satisfactory solution. But there you have it. I guess for the next expansion, the devs might try and hit a middle ground, which, as for many things in Path of Fire, might be the exact best thing to do, where Heart of Thorns had loads of metas and POF had none. Find the middle ground this time between them, and there you have it. Moving on, we got Ian Freeman Lee, who says, howdy, I've been really enjoying the content lately, thanks very much, and says, can't wait to get back to some more juicy lore speculation. Believe me, there will be with this Underworld stuff now done. I have 2 questions if you're feeling generous. Oh, well, let's see. So, spoilers. Have we gotten any current events with Joko's minions warping into the 6 maps that the gates in the last Daybreak mission led to? The maps were specifically called out, and it seemed like the most obvious current events hinting I've ever seen, but I haven't encountered anything. Maybe they're waiting till episode 2 to avoid spoilers. If they do add these events, how do you feel about something like this newer going away once added? I've always felt a little mixed about current events being permanent. Unpopular opinion, but I actually like there being some things in the game that only happen while they are actually current in the story. Do you actually... okay, so that's question 1. I do think I disagree with you on the idea of current events being permanent. I think Living World Season 1 and, that idea of impermanent content is a really nice idea. But that whole content being deleted, when I think about all the stuff that was in Season 1, it still sort of stings that it's not there for me. And I was willing to try it, really. I was willing to defend it during the Season 1 days. But I think if you're going to add something to the MMO, may as well build it into a body of work and get as much value out of it as possible by leaving it there for as long as possible. So I think I prefer current events as permanent stuff. And the answer as to why they haven't done that just yet, because I think it's a great observation you've made, might just be because... it's not been very long since the triple release came out, and the first priority thing that they had on their minds was Winter's Day. I don't know, you might see next Tuesday, the Tuesday after it, the one after that certainly, which is still before episode 2, you might find that current events play on those portals and we see some kind of big Joko invasion of Corteria. That whole side of the story right now, by the way, is one of the most fascinating aspects of what they gave us in Daybreak. Like, they're really setting up that Joko's going to attack Corteria. How did they show us that? That could lead to a lot of current event stuff, or will it even be more than just current event stuff? And I think they'll play off of it. It just might be that it's not been that long, and Winter's Day is all of a sudden here too, which has its own batch of stuff that maybe that current events team was doing too. Remember, we're not quite sure, but it feels like the festival team might also be the current events team, and if they were working on Winter's Day races and stuff, maybe that's what was going on. We'll see. Next question as well was, do you actually think that they will continue to expand Istan? I hope so, but I'm not so sure. The fact they named the map the domain of Istan sounds pretty all-encompassing to me. I also would argue that the devs, including Farina, which is so far away from the playable map, could add fuel to the idea we're not getting more. That being said, I thought your idea about being expanded dry top style was interesting, and it sounded like a plausible way to go about it, especially if the season is so long. I question the viability of adding 9 new maps to the game, there has to be a point where we simply have too many to support a stable population. Gradually expanding a few new maps to be larger and larger seems like it could be a good middle ground. Thanks, to keep up the good work. All right, this second part, there's a lot to dig at. First, on your idea that we'll hit a point where there have been too many maps to have a stable population, let me tell you something. I think you're right, but I think what's funny about what you're saying is you haven't realized, in my opinion, we hit that point ages ago. I think that Season 1, and why it took so long for us to genuinely get a lot of interesting maps, was because the devs were still umming and ahhing about this, but I think by the time we got to Heart of Thorns and Season 3, they realized that we were beyond that point. If you really think about it, go into Guild Wars 2 right now on your, random mega server that will drop you in. There are tons of Quarteria maps that you can visit, and there won't be large or even minimal sometimes stable populations in them. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that we passed that point so long ago that the devs just don't care anymore. It's like, we'll just keep adding new maps, and so what if only the more contemporary of those maps are the really populated ones? That's what most people care about anyway. I think that this was a discussion that was had a fair bit back, and now they've just thrown caution to the wind, and they're just saying, yeah, if we're going to add 9 maps in a year, let's add 9 maps in a year. It doesn't matter, because that ideal of having a stable population across all of Guild Wars 2 for all time is just like absurd and becomes harder and harder to hit. So let's just embrace the fact that it's not going to happen and have some fun. And I think that a lot of this too is probably tied to their implementation of mega servers, in that they can kind of rest on that system to shore up their defenses, so to speak, wherever things get too bad. So there's that side of things. However, all of that isn't to say I don't like the idea of dry top style expanding. I think that could be good for the Domain of Istan. Yes, it's called the Domain of Istan. The Domain of Vabi was all of Vabi. So sure, maybe they'll just expand it, just as we saw in Season 2. And they'll slowly, allow us to get back to Farina, and it's the same large open world map. My only downside to that is I don't really see how there's like a meta that would support that, and how some of the features in the map could be expanded, like Dry Top and the Silver Waste, as they were expanded, because the Silver Waste was too, really. They had metas and content that clearly could be keyed into, and Istan, if they did it here, it would almost be arbitrary, the fact that it's the same map. It would just mean that there's no loading screen, but essentially you'd have a totally separate content in a different area, different race, different bounties, different meta, and it's, for all intents and purposes, a different map anyway, so they may as well make it a different map so that population appears higher, because they can matchmake more people into that zone, essentially. Hopefully that hasn't become too confused of an idea for people listening. So I think that, yes, they could still expand it. And I agree with you as well that, yeah, they let us go to Farina, so it's like maybe they've given us all the key locations anyway. We've got all of those really priority places, like the Sunspit Great Hall and all the stuff around Kamadan, or Palawadan as it's now known. We even had Farina. What else is there that's interesting, really? What, the Tender Bog? That's a valid point. However, the one thing I would say that holds me back from going too deep down that rabbit hole is Daybreak did seem to hint at stuff going on in the Isna Isles. Now, they could have just talked about that, because that's good world building and that's good establishing of the setting, and to talk about things outside of the borders without any intent to even go to them is actually a pretty good, in my opinion. But I think that because of the way they talked about the Isna Isles, I think it will become relevant in the story. I think we will be going there, and there is one final extremely rich area of lore that is available in Istan, but not in any of the areas Guild Wars 2 currently lets us explore, and those are the regions that Baltec mysteriously appeared in the first game. Now, we have no guarantee that the devs are interested in expanding on his story, or whether it will be main prominence in the core storyline, but I think going to the Isna Isles and some of that stuff, there's still opportunity there. And I do think we'll get at least one more thing in Istan over these, potentially 7 releases or whatever it will be before the next expansion comes out. So we will see. It's good food for thought, though, and I really like the question. Moving on, we have Stu Carroll, who says, AWP, given that the fractals have the potential to include any content from any time and any place, what do you think about ArenaNet using them to replay some Guild Wars 1 missions in Guild Wars 2? Guild Wars 1 was and is still a brilliant game, however, as technology inevitably evolves, the sad state is that graphically it starts to look antiquated. There were some stonkingly good missions in Guild Wars 1, and some of which are moderately relevant to Guild Wars 2 today. I think that going back and doing some of these missions through Fractal System would be truly amazing. Your thoughts, please? Good use of the word stonkingly there. So listen, if you'd asked me this question 2 years ago, I would be furiously saying yes, 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 yes. However, listen, they've done so much looking back to Guild Wars 1 lately, and they've done so much returning to Guild Wars 1 stuff. Even this triple release did it with the Underworld, that I've had my fill. I don't think that Guild Wars 2 can be declared a successful or proud game of itself if all it can do is constantly retell a decade-old game that they made way back when. I do think that there's a point where it's like, stop looking back at Guild Wars 1, and I think we might even be at it already. So I wouldn't hate them doing this. I think it would be fun, and as a Guild Wars 1 player, I'd really enjoy it. But does Guild Wars 2 need to keep doing that? I actually say no. If I was in any kind of authority position there, which God forbid I never should be, because it would lead to some absolutely questionable directions, I would not ever really say, oh, the Fractals team should do more Guild Wars 1 stuff. I think some ideas and loose connections, like inspired by Guild Wars 1's type stuff, such as we see with the Jademore Fractal, is a good idea. But I think it has to stop at some point. I think one of the places I'm very out of alignment with the general community right now is there's a lot of people like you, Stu, who keep asking, more Guild Wars 1, more Guild Wars 1. But as someone who's played so much of Guild Wars 2 and been one of you for so long, I'm now at my point where I'm like, okay, we don't have to keep doing Guild Wars 1 here. Give me something new with the Fractals. There's so much rich and so much interesting, so many time periods that I'd like that. There is another element I disagree with you here as well on this comment. And it's the idea that Guild Wars 1 missions deserve to be retold because they have some gameplay relevance. I really don't see that at all, unless what you're saying they're relevant because of the story, which I think that there could be more connection, obviously, and we saw exactly that with the Underworld. But gameplay-wise, I'm not really sure there's much relevance. If you liked a mission in Guild Wars 1, it's still there in Guild Wars 1. And I know the game looks old. I know it hasn't aged very well, as many older MMOs don't. But it is still there. And I don't think that's Guild Wars 2's duty to try and retell that experience. Especially when, let's face it, this sequel is exceptionally different. Most of the content in the sequel does not resemble what the original game was like. And that's, that's the pain point that most people have. So yeah, and it's not that I think you're a fool for what you believe. It's just I've sort of gone through enough stages now that I'm not really in that camp. I want to see some Fractals that talk about some new stuff, and it doesn't have to be G-Rule 1. Moving on, we've got Michael Tone, who says, I was watching one of your videos/streams recently where you were discussing what entities went to the mist when they died, i.e. dragon minions and whatnot, and it seemed like you came to the conclusion that pretty much every living thing on Tyria would go to the mist on death. Correct me if I misinterpreted. I never fully said that, but the game seemed to suggest it, such as being a Sylvari player character who dies in the Path of Fire story, and guess what, you go to the mist. The Underworld seems to have like a Zaitani minion as well that's gone to the mist. There's certainly some stuff to talk about there. I'm not sure I'm settled on how I feel, but yes, you are right, we were talking about that. With that in mind, what would happen to an entity from the mists if they died on Tyria? Like a god, for instance. What I'm getting at is Balthazar alive in the mists after we killed him? You, I think, have done something very beautiful here, in that you very quickly cut extremely deep into the incoherencies of this franchise on like a deep level. There are certain doors that ArenaNet opened with their discussion of the mists that are just almost completely unworkable from a narrative standpoint. You might be right, and there's the idea of world versus world as well that constantly comes to my mind. The idea that each world versus world is like another alternate reality version of Tyria, and that there are all these different infinite fractures. I think that this is fun stuff to play with, but I'm not sure whether we should think too seriously about it. About the closest they could do is some kind of bizarre fractal where they show a version of Tyria, maybe, where Balthazar never got defeated, or as you say, has now returned to the mists and we fight him there. But it is kind of an endless loop, isn't it, really? Where you kill someone and then they go to the mists, and then they come back out of the mists, and then you kill them and they go to the mists. And it's kind of a question of where's the end. I don't like thinking too deep about this part of Guild Wars 2. But maybe you guys do as well, and if you can find some logical sense behind it, I'd love to hear. But I do think when they had Balthazar defeated in the way that he was in Path of Fire, I think he's left the story. And if this is kind of you fishing to see if he'll come back, I don't know whether that's a good idea. And we can do the same question for stuff like Scarlet, by the way. I actually have some interesting ideas for a video I want to do about what we were revealed at the end of Path of Fire when Kraukatoruk revived that dead Devourer. Because the idea that he can revive stuff and then brand it is sort of huge, but we'll get there soon. Moving on, we've got MMJS E. Clark, who says, "Hey WP, mid-20s life crisis? How about mid-20s life awesomeness?" Oh, that's the most beautiful compliment I think I've ever had. Thank you so much, because you're awesome. Anyway, it seems you're getting more into Fashion Wars too. I noticed your Necro Silvari from the last Q&A video had a very nice distinctive look with the new Path of Fire armor pieces. Is this a thing you're paying more attention to? Are there any aspects of Guild Wars 2 fashion / appearance of armor and weapons that would interest you as a lore enthusiast? I am so sorry that you've been so lovely and complimentary at the start of this question. The truth is, no, there's nothing really that I care about lore-wise with Fashion Wars 2, and no, I haven't been paying more attention to Fashion Wars 2. Basically what happened with that Necro is I decided to skin the full set with Path of Fire stuff. That's it. And I dyed it random colours. Listen, I have had very brief windows of caring about Fashion Wars 2, but what kind of happens to me is it fizzles out very, very quickly. Like, I understand people who really care about it and, you know, obsess over the materials and the way that their stuff dies and all of this. And I have had phases where I felt that and identified with it, but it evaporates extremely quick. And except for that Rev that I made earlier in the year, the Malix Rev with the matching build in gameplay and so forth, it's evaporated for me, and that's been about it for 2017. I'm really sorry, but just slapping on an outfit and using default dyes and things is kind of more my MO than anything else, and that part of my experience playing the game hasn't changed at all. Sorry. Next, we've got a question here. I usually try to give people answers that are full, and, you know, we really dig in, but this is such a ludicrous question that if I really tried to answer in full, it would just swamp the entire video down. This is like a series of videos, not even a single video. So I'll just be very brief about it because it's the only way I can tackle it, and hopefully you understand. But it's Ida, who had several questions last time, but here says, if you had the power to add 5 new features to the game, what would you pick? Okay, so 5 features. All the features that I've got here, and I wrote them out very quickly for you, all have a general idea of renewable content, and the idea is sort of shoring up Guild Wars 2's core systems and core reward structures and ideas that keep incentive for people to keep playing without like bloating things or whatever. And actually, as a lot of you guys know, I think various aspects of this MMO need serious revamping. So here are the 5 features that I have listed. Number 1, and in no particular order, but number 1, PvE leagues, allowing people to renewably and meaningfully replay a lot of the core content and extract information and worth out of it. Feature 2, build templates and accompanying cosmetic loadouts, which I've talked about many times before, and I think someone on today's Super Q&A is actually going to refer to later. So build templates is number 2. Number 3, new tutorials for the game and basically a restructure of the leveling experience, and that's an insanely huge thing that I'm alluding to there, but there you have it. We'll package it in one short little sentence. Number 4, a mastery system restructure, because I think it is not fit for purpose, and I've talked about that, especially if you watched a lot of the Heart of Thorns review. And finally, just for funsies, because, I mean, I could be super serious about all of these, fishing. Let's have fishing. There you go. That's the kind of feature I'm sure a lot of people wanted to hear. That's a new feature for Guild Wars 2. Let's do that. All right, so next question we have Lily. So Lily Starflame says, my question has to do with the contest. So yeah, if people don't know, one of the reasons, or the reason I should say, aside from my extra time raiding trying to beat Doom, that videos have been quite slow here with the triple release is because I'm doing the judging for this contest right now. They say, if I wasn't running the contest, if it wasn't me, it was someone else, 1, would I have entered it? And 2, if I did decide to enter it, what kind of video would I have made? Merry Christmas. So I think I would have entered it, for sure. If it was from ArenaNet, absolutely I would have entered it, without a doubt. I think I would have felt a bit weird, though, because I think I don't know, if ArenaNet ran it and the idea was to encourage new talent, and that was the main theme, I probably wouldn't have. Because I'm not new talent, and because I've got a big enough slice of the pizza here on the Guild Wars 2 side, and other people are deserving of a lot more. So I wouldn't try and crowd that out. I don't think that would be fair at all. If it was another community member, though, and it was just about, you know, growing the scene purely that, I think, yeah, I totally would have entered. And I've actually talked about the kind of video I would have made, which I came very close to making, still might become a thing eventually. Many people don't know this, but I originally came into this franchise not because I went into a game shop and bought Guild Wars and tried it out, but my older brother actually did this many years ago during Prophecy's original release. He was the big player that played it a lot, and I kind of got into it through him via osmosis. He's never played Guild Wars 2, but was a massive fan of GW1. So my entry for this contest would have been getting him around my house, putting a camera on him, and making him play Guild Wars 2 for the first time, right as Path of Fire comes out, and talk about his old memories playing GW1 and what he thinks of this sequel, like 7 years since he's, you know, even touched this franchise at all. I think that is what I would enter for it, and hopefully it'd be really entertaining. I'd like cut a montage together, throw it online, and hopefully people would have fun watching it and then think about getting their own family members into the game. And hopefully that would grow the scene. So that would have been my entry into my own competition if someone else was running it. And I think it's a cool idea, right, guys? Right? Right? All right, moving on. So next question is from Umbra again, who says, where do you think and or hope the next expansion takes place? And who would be the antagonist and final boss? Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to think about this, and it all kind of depends on where you think the end of Guild Wars 2 is. I mentioned earlier, I don't think we should constantly retread Guild Wars 1's grounds. If we assume, therefore, that the next expansion is the last because the game is dying or something and ArenaNet are going to replace it, I actually would want it somewhere totally new. I would not want the Blood Legion homelands. I would not want the Far Shiver Peaks. I would not want the Verdant Cascades. I would not want Cantha. I would want somewhere totally new. I'd want one of these continents, one of these regions that was hinted at on the Dermond Priory library floor map and some of the other ones. Or, you know, even like a pure mist-based expansion. Or I would be happy with the Depths of Tyria-based expansion. Any of those things if there was only one more. However, if we, and I think much more reasonable to do this, if we assume there are, you know, 2-3 more expansions at least for this game, then Cantha. Cantha has got to be next, in my opinion. And then, yes, another one, retreading some of those Eye of the North areas. And then finally, I want to go somewhere new. Basically, what I'm saying to you is, before Guild Wars 2 ends, whenever that is, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 1 expansion, 20 expansions, before it ends, I want to see it go somewhere that isn't just walking back in Guild Wars 1's shoes. That's what I really want. And so yeah, that kind of changes my opinion on where the next expansion should be. But if I think most clearly and logically about this, I think Cantha should be the next expansion. Cash in and a little bit more of that nostalgia, catch as many people as possible, and then see about some new directions to go in. Because really, it was very minimal what we got in Eye of the North and some of those other areas anyway. So yeah, that's sort of what I think. Next question is from Ryuk, who says, a bit of a personal question. And that's that you've talked about working in the IT industry and your problems with its work structure. What exactly was your job, support, developing, or something else? I'll just point out, my problem, I think you're talking about a big discussion I had on a Twitch stream. That was not so much about working in IT. I mean, there were elements, and that's my main experience. But it was talking about corporate gluttony and inefficiency and just the kind of culture you get in corporations that are too big and wastefulness, and it was really just talking about that. It just so happens to be my personal experience through this. Among other things, it has been in IT. So what I actually did, yes, I did support for a long time. I did then transfer over to development, but didn't really learn very much and didn't do very much. I also just had a lot of generic roles involving the securing of clients for various projects and small team management, stuff like that. But generally, one of the reasons why I really didn't enjoy what I was doing, among several things, was actually having quite an ill-defined purpose and function. So I sort of got out before my soul left my body entirely, because I could really feel sort of my spirit being crushed in that environment. So there you go. Anyway, a bit of a downer. I guess we won't go on about that too much, but there you have it. Next question. Here we have Kakaratog again, who says, second question, I know I'm being greedy. It's fine if it's too much. In your last normal Q&A, you said you weren't satisfied with the story of how the desert was turned into an ocean. And you quote, because the power of God magic in battle. I would agree, but then I found something that might work. Let me just stop you there. Actually, I am satisfied with that. I didn't say I wasn't satisfied. I said within the context of how they were using that to justify some other stuff in the story. That's what I wasn't satisfied with. But the idea that this big battle evaporated the ocean, I'm perfectly satisfied with that, and I think that's fine. Anyway, you go on to say, what if the ocean disappearing was not a side effect of the battle, but a tactical decision before or during the battle? I'm not sure where Abaddon was fought, but if it was there, maybe the water gave him power as the god of water. Yeah, essentially it was around there, right? This might also, though weaker, justify why the gods might not want to fight Balthazar in the desert, which is, well, maybe not fiery, but it's certainly hot. I know the second part of that theory is a lot weaker, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Yeah, no, I think this is a good idea. It's not really a question. You're just looking for affirmation on whether, I like this. I think that's a good idea, If Abaddon's the god of secrets and water and oceans are a big thing, and then you take him like a fish out of water, you remove all of that water so he's sort of alone in a barren landscape, maybe that is a cool tactic to fight him. But the way that the devs framed it, the writers framed, the story frames it, the way that it's framed is that this destruction was undesired, and it has to be an undesired thing in order and like an uncontrollable thing in order to then justify why the gods so many years later feel they cannot go again. Maybe it can be everything all at once. I do see a bit of wiggle room there, but yeah, I like the idea. I think it's cool, and it would have been nice to see some confirmation one way or the other, because it is one of the more epic set pieces in this franchise's world building, isn't it? Really, like an entire ocean drying up just because of the force of a battle between gods. Very fun, very high fantasy and large scale. Next, we got a question from Marcus, who says, hey WP, a simple question that fits the theme of the last 2017 Super Q&A. What are you looking forward to in 2018? Merry Winter's Day and happy holidays. Well, so there's two sides of this. One of them is really boring as an answer, but I'll give it to you. So on the WP side, I'm really excited to get back to alternate LPs and things and to run with those ideas. On a personal side of things, this is really weird, and it was something I wanted to do last year, but I didn't in the end. I'm really getting a bit miserable with how fast time seems to be moving, and especially this year, even though I've actually accomplished quite a lot, it feels like it's gone too fast. So in an attempt to slow down time, and I'm seriously going and doing it here, I'm writing a journal throughout the next year to sort of sum up my experiences of each day and hopefully change up the schedule and the formula a little and remember a little bit more of what's going on, so that by the time 2019 starts, I'll feel like I've led a long and satisfactory year with lots of different stuff going on. That's the idea, that's the hope, and we'll see how my psychology holds up. This is not the first I've sort of played around with this idea, but I'm really gunning for it, and I'm excited to go gunning for it for 2018. If I remember a year from now, maybe we'll talk about how this project went, but that's the idea, and I'm sticking with it, and I'm quite excited. I'm starting just a few days. Moving on, we got Kerry Williams, who says, hey WP, I was thinking back to how ArenaNet said Heart of Thorns was about building systems that could then be used in future releases, like the Mastery system, and Path of Fire was about content. Yet we've just seen with Daybreak that there were systems built into Path of Fire 2 that mean we get a bunch of content on one map. So I guess you're talking about bounties and things, right? Do you think they've set the bar too high with this episode? Do you think they can keep up with having adventures, races, and bounties in each map for the season? Do you think they should? What about meta events as well? I personally wouldn't mind as long as the map is fun, but I imagine some people might expect a lot now that they've given us a lot straight off the bat. Also, a random non-Guild Wars question. Has anyone told you have a nice voice to listen to? I often listen to your videos when I get home from working, and my girlfriend says Mr. Potato has a nice voice. This is gonna sound weird and like I'm fishing for compliments. It's actually a funny story. I used to get a lot of those comments, but then I stopped trying to speak with such a deep voice, I guess, or I started getting a lot more shrill and high pitched, and they have waned away a bit, but yes, it's happened a lot, and it's still weird and odd for me to hear people say. Now, to your actual main question, I don't know whether it's our place to say. I'm sorry, this is a horrible, boring answer, but I just don't know. If the devs put that in there, we have to assume that they've got some confidence they can do that each release. You're asking me, have they got scoping issues? Have they bitten off more than they can chew? Is this the same as Living World Season 2, where all of a sudden we're going to find out that they're out of time and they can't sustain it, and so on and so forth? You're asking me these things, and as much as I follow this franchise, I'm not a dev. I don't work at ArenaNet. I don't know how hard it is for them to do these things. We did hear that the bounty system was made to be easy to drop in. And we saw that they did that with Daybreak. I think the best thing we can do as the community right now is just assume that they can keep that stuff up. If you look at the adventures, if you look at the way that the races are done, they do seem like they're pretty easy to drop in formulas. But I almost cringe at hearing myself say that because I don't really know. We just have to hope that they're professionals and what they've put in is actually sustainable. And if it's not, well, let's talk about it when there's a sign that it's not. So far, since the release of Heart of Thorns and the end of the content drought, as it was called, I haven't seen the devs slip once. Not really. Well, except maybe a crack in the ice, which was one of my favorite releases, actually. But for the core story, I think that there were some slip-ups there. But generally, you know, they've got these things out on time, and I hope they continue to. So get back to me on that if Episode 2 now is missing bounties and races. I'm not going to sit here and worry about it until there's signs that they will miss, and there's signs that they have bitten off too much. So let's see. Next we've got Erls, who says, "Hey WP, my question is about game rewards. I love the Guild Wars 2 model. No endless gear treadmill, accessible cosmetic rewards, horizontal progression, some very exclusive rewards for specific kinds of content. It is a model that keeps the game accessible and satisfying for people like me, adults with a busy life, disposable income and a wish to enjoy a good MMO. Like many others, I'm not a whale. I avoid all RNG on the gem store, but I also grant a solid, steady flux of money to ArenaNet, and I am happy with having most of the game content and rewards not being gated behind an inaccessible grind or challenges that require a demanding schedule that I cannot really have. Recently though, I found myself in agreement with a point you made. At some point you played Fashion Wars with all your mains and ults, you maxed out most of the gear that matters, and then... Of course, there's enjoyment in the content itself. Istan was incredibly good, but rewards give goals and make you come back to that content. This is even more problematic, I think, for those that, unlike me, are hardcore players. What kind of reward can they expect in the long run after legendary armor and exclusive raid weapon skins? What kind of rewards could ArenaNet introduce without alienating people like me, but also keeping satisfied more hardcore players like you? The other day, you mentioned build templates all along with a system that allows you to switch your appearance based on the region you're playing. Well, that would be brilliant. By the way, happy Christmas. I hope our support on Patreon will allow you to make some nice presents to the persons you love. Actually, I've done okay on Christmas for other people this year, and it's been really nice to be able to be a bit generous. So yes, it actually has. And, you know, I really do mean it when I say Patreon is very... life-changing for me, so it's been pretty good. So anyway, the answer to your question, we kind of talked about a fair bit earlier, but I will go one further. I actually think that Guild Wars 2 double dips with reward system issue problems right now on both the casuals and the hardcore people, because as far as I'm concerned, I try and follow this franchise very closely, and even I am unsure and you know, not exactly 100% on where all the rewards in Path of Fire come from, what items, what currencies are used where, and so on. Like, I think so much stuff is really complicated and weirdly buried in the UI. I think that the game is really struggling for that region. I think that the purpose of why we're playing and what our loot is and what our rewards is something casual players struggle with a lot. And on the high end, the really hardcore players, I think the truly, sincerely hardcore people just love what Guild Wars 2 is, and they'll play for that, even the rewards aren't a big part of it for them. But there is definitely a significant part of the community, you know, just wondering, what am I doing this for? Why am I playing? And that's why, like earlier when I was asked what kind of systems would I like, is those sort of renewable things that allow people to continue getting value out of the game, you know, even on replay, that I think is so important. It's kind of a weird balance to make, and ArenaNet have really pushed down on one side of the seesaw. The side of the seesaw that says get everything and it's all account bound and you get it really quick and nice and comfortable. It will leave people wanting. Those who want rewards, it sincerely will. I don't have the answers to this because I think it is actually the oldest problem with Guild Wars 2. I think it is years and years and years in the making. I think it has its roots in several things, even as fundamental and basic as, you know, no kill stealing, right? Everybody gets a tag and loot. We've talked about this quite recently. So I don't know where I would even begin with it. But I think it is one of the biggest problems with this game's retention and stuff, for sure. Rewards need a big look, but maybe even too substantive to actually change for the game at this point. Moving on, we've got Porkinazer. Brilliant name. Who says, hey WP, since it's almost Christmas, what's your favourite Christmas film? Alright, I've got several. Now, anyone in the UK is going to answer, you know, some of the normal stuff that you would find on TV, like Zulu, right? But my favourite Christmas film isn't even really a Christmas film, but I always feel extremely Christmassy when I watch it. It has one scene set at Christmas right at the end, but it was a film I very much enjoyed when I was younger. I very much still enjoy as an adult. I watch very frequently, so I think it hits all those criteria and it makes me think of Christmas, and it's Toy Story 1. I know some of you might be kind of bored to hear that, but I really like Toy Story 1, and I know it's not very high on most people's list of favourite Pixar movies and stuff, but to me that always makes me feel extremely Christmassy, and I tried to watch it at some point over the Christmas season each time. So there you have it, and yeah, it's not really about Christmas. At the end there's a scene at Christmas, but I suppose it's that connection with toys, and there's the birthday party early with gifts and stuff. So yeah, that always gets me feeling very Christmassy, but several other movies do too. A movie that sprung to my mind when thinking of the answer to this question, but that is not my favourite, but is like About a Boy. That movie's kind of like a Christmas movie. I don't think it's a very good Christmas movie, and it's not necessarily my favourite, but that's probably the film I associate with Christmas more than any other in the whole world. Even if I'm not a particular fan of it, I think it's alright. So there you go. Moving on, we've got Matthew Mafera, who says, do you think that we will ever see full sets of Elite Specialization armor? I think it would be a great way to give players an entry point to raiding if you had a big collection to get a full set of Ascended gear. I like the idea of Elite Specializations having a unique skin set to wear to help really say, this is what a Dragon Hunter looks like, this is what the Scrappers look like, this is what the Firebrands look like, and so on. But that's the only thing that really excites me about it. That and the idea that you could almost quest, like, maybe you know, learn a bit more about the faction as you collect all these items for this collection. But collections in general, being one and done things, don't excite me that much in the game. And the idea of it being a bypass for all other methods of getting Ascended armor, I don't like at all. I think that stuff like Ascended armor crafting and the value of fractals and raids and the amount of those boxes you get and stuff, I think that's extremely important and shouldn't be tampered with or bypassed by collections. They can do an Elite Specialization weapon that bypasses that stuff, because it's one weapon out of, you know, lots of different types of weapons that are out there. If they do it for Ascended armor, there's only 3 categories of Ascended armor: heavy, medium, light. And once you've got one of them, you can transfer it across to many different characters. I just think it would be too much of an undercut, and they won't do it. I would most like basically what you're saying, except that it's exotic. I'd be well on board with that. Next, we've got Janice Kelmins, who says, hey WP, what is your Xmas tradition? Or if you don't have one, tell us about how you imagine your perfect Xmas. Alright, I've got a bit of a sad story here. I don't really have a Christmas tradition anymore. I think that Christmas has like certain beats, you know. You wake up too early, you open your presents, you fall asleep again at like 10 o'clock till like 1, have your Christmas dinner, help people wash up. All of a sudden, the light's gone immediately already because it gets dark at like 4 in the afternoon on goddamn Christmas. And then you all get drunk in the evening. Like, that's generally a Christmas day to me, and I like that. But the main tradition I used to have was the dog that I grew up with, who passed away a couple of years ago now. I used to always, not on Christmas Day, but Christmas Eve, right around midnight, so as Christmas Day started, I would always give him an extra long walk out in the dark before Christmas Day started, because I always felt kind of bad for the dog in that they, you know, we used to get a few treats or whatever, but I always used to feel bad that obviously they'd be kind of ignored for most of the day. So the night before, I'd always go on this big walk, and there's something really magical and nice about walking around on Christmas Eve, right, you know, right when most people are asleep, right when, you know, all the kids in all the houses are super excited and think Santa's about to visit them, and the air is very still and it's always extremely chilly. I just really like the atmosphere right there in the dead of night on Christmas Eve. And I used to walk my dog like every year until, you know, he passed away, and so I don't do it anymore. But that was a tradition I always kind of like miss to a certain extent. So there you go. That's sort of my answer. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Moving on, we've got Kerry Talk again, who says, I can no longer stop myself. His question 4, did the Adpocalypse and the recent demonetization bot after that affect your channel much? Sorry if this was asked before. No, it really didn't. Obviously Patreon is a huge part of where I get my livelihood, right? Ads, what you guys should understand is at my level on YouTube, ads are not worth that much. They're worth something, but they're not worth that much. And that's really not how I sustain myself at all. So yes, I lost a bit of money. No, it wasn't a very big deal. I don't think I've actually been hit with demonetization as much as some other YouTubers, and particularly a lot of smaller YouTubers speak to me about having it done, but it's not a very big deal to me. And if you want my God's to honest opinion, I actually think most of the time when I see someone complaining about online, I get very cynical. Now, I fully understand I am extremely privileged to have a very solid Patreon campaign, and I am privileged to not have it affect me too much. But I do get cynical because I feel like most people who talk about it, their ad revenue must be so low they weren't living their lives anyway on it. And it seems like a fairly easy way to get the internet to notice you and to rally around you. The amount of large, massive Reddit threads that I've seen just because the internet's got angry and rallied alongside some random YouTuber who said, sorry, I'm getting demonetized, I'm getting all these problems, I'm getting flagged but for this, this, and this. I think that happens a lot of the time, and I'm cynical enough to believe that most of the time people are just using it sort of as a bit of a publicity bump rather than the fact it's actually that important to them. But on the other hand, maybe I have no right to talk on this topic whatsoever. But that's kind of how I feel, and just personally, yeah, it's not been a big deal to me. I'd rather not get on my high horse about it. So moving on, we've got Valsaron again, who says, I just ordered myself a HTC Vive, and this is the last question, and I have an awful answer to this, and I'm so sorry. I just ordered myself a HTC Vive. I remember mentioning that you had a VR headset, and even trying Guild Wars 2 out in it. Do you have any suggestions for games? My answer is no, because I don't have a HTC Vive, and because for the past year, I've barely looked at VR at all. I'm kind of sitting around waiting for Gen 2 to sort of rekindle my enthusiasm for the whole scene. So I'm majorly out of touch. Asking me at this point is very little better than just asking a random. I could tell you a lot more about the Gen 1 and early dev kit stuff on the Oculus side than how a lot of things are going. My other interests, I suppose, for now are sort of following how Palmer Lucky's life's gone and the kind of decisions he's made and stuff like that, which really isn't to do with VR at all. So I really couldn't give you that many informed opinions, except that I don't know. I think that Gen 2 is probably going to be really cool, but it could be like 12 to 18 months away still. So there you have it. And there you go, guys. That's the Super Q&A for today. Sorry that we ended on kind of some bummer questions there, but that's how it goes. If you guys are keen on asking your own stuff, again, on any topic, I will give you an answer. You can click the link in the description down below. That will take you to Patreon. It takes like a second or two to sign up. You can support me as much or as little as you want. And yeah, you get some other cool perks like early access video, podcast versions of the videos and stuff like that. Whatever I can do to help out and encourage people to do that kind of thing. So thanks, guys. Thanks as well, and seriously, for sticking with the channel during these past 2 weeks and probably the next 2 weeks while I go for this competition side stuff, which I know a lot of you aren't even that invested in, but I think it's really important I do it right. So, yeah, thanks for sticking with me through that, and hopefully we'll get through and get some really good content going about both POF and Daybreak, especially on the story side of stuff. My story summaries, you know, we've got a lot to get through here. And hopefully before episode 2 comes out, because then I'm going to get swamped even further down. Raid content is some of the new stuff I think you'll be seeing on the pipeline very shortly, just while it's all fresh on my mind, and I can talk to you about Doom and all of that other stuff in Desmina. So there'll be plenty of lore to discuss then at that point. And yeah, thanks guys, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.